Hey, this is Pat Gamble, defensive lineman from Georgia Tech, and you're listening to On the Fence Side.
It ain't the left side or the right side, then it must be the fence side. Inside. It ain't the left side.
Thank you, Solo D. Welcome to another episode of On the Fence Side as we approach the NFL Draft. Brian Catanzaro and Paul Pickin joining you. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, iTunes, YouTube, and Spreaker. We have Chris Kouffman joining us, resuming our draft segment as we continue and approach the NFL Draft, less than 3 weeks away. So, Chris, taking a look at the beginning of this class, kind of a thin defensive tackle group compared to previous years. Dolphins picked 22nd in the first round. Does anybody really stick out at you as somebody the Dolphins may consider 22? I've heard Malik McDowell and Caleb Brantley in that late first round, early second round area.
Well, I would say that Caleb Brantley would surprise me a lot if the Dolphins went ahead and picked him at 22 overall. I think that the guys to keep an eye on for the first round, and there's kind of just an outside possibility that they go with either one of these guys, would be Malik McDowell, but also Jonathan Allen. And the reason that I say Jonathan Allen is because he does have some shoulder issues, and they do have a couple of NFL teams very concerned. They will probably have the Dolphins concerned, but the Dolphins seem to be more willing to take on medical risk than some other teams have been. So if you see Jonathan Allen kind of go crashing down the board on draft day, then you could see the Dolphins jump up and go ahead and take him. And the reason that they would probably feel comfortable doing it is similar to the Laramie Tunsil situation a year ago, is this is a guy that can play defensive tackle for them, which is, the third defensive tackle in the rotation is sort of a need for them, but also a guy that can play some defensive end. He played some defensive end at Alabama, and he has the movement skills of a defensive end. So he can do both of those things. Malik McDowell is a possibility, probably not so much as a defensive tackle, as a base defensive tackle for them, but I think Malik McDowell might be in line for just a straight-up move out to defensive end. When I watch him play, there are two guys in Montravius Adams and Jonathan Allen who are defensive tackles that can move like defensive ends and can move out there and play like a defensive end and play pretty well because they just have that kind of athletic ability and skill set. But Malik McDowell is more of a guy who seems like he's always been a defensive end and just is playing defensive tackle, and that might not be the best fit for him at the NFL level because there isn't a whole lot of history of guys that look like Malik McDowell, are built like him and play like him, going ahead and playing defensive tackle in the NFL and doing it particularly well. So he might move out to defensive end and be sort of a comparison or an either-or guy with a Taco Charlton, who's a player that we talked about as a defensive end possibility for Miami at 22. But the problems, of course, with Malik start from there. There are a lot of questions about his off-field and locker room personality, his work ethic, those sorts of things. Just the rumor mill stuff coming out of Michigan State has supposedly not been very good on Malik, and that could have them turned off. But if it's not one of those two, Jonathan Allen or Malik as a defensive end, probably more like, then I would be surprised if it's anybody, if it's any defensive tackle at 22.
I heard on ESPN First Watch, which is Mel Kiper and Todd McShay's podcast, that Malik McDowell was the worst interview at the Combine, and one general manager who had been in the NFL for years said that it was the worst interview he'd ever had with anyone. Do you have any insight as far as what the deal is with this guy? Is it a work ethic issue? Is it a character issue? Does he just say some stupid things here and there?
Well, I haven't heard a whole lot of it. I would just take it at face value, but you also have to consider that the possibility that these guys are exaggerating on purpose, and also just these NFL people, when they get into the anonymous quote part, they are kind of gossip queens, and they like to exaggerate and say things that might not have a whole lot of meaning or significance when it comes to these guys' NFL careers. We've seen that before, and so you never never really know. But I will say that the rumor mill on him has not been great, has really been kind of bad. So that's something that you have to be aware of. If he goes falling down the board and you're wondering why he's still there in like the second round or maybe even the third round, then, well, okay, that's it. That's the reason.
CK, I'm going to jump in with an odd question here. How much do you think Ross would still pound the table for this guy, given where he's from? I mean, we all know he pounds the table there a little bit, even though he supposedly lets his guys do their jobs.
Well, first off, just to put this out there, the guy with the connections to Michigan State is actually Gase himself, who coached with and under the head coach of Michigan State. So he will have good information on Malik that way. But Ross is more likely to really pound the table for Chris Wormley or somebody like that from Michigan, because Ross is practically an owner of the Michigan football team. So I think that with Malik, it's not like Ross certainly wouldn't step in and say, not him because he's a rival. He's from a rival school. But I think that he might kind of, wink at somebody a little bit when and if a Chris Wormley or a Jabril Peppers is on the board, and we'll see if anybody takes the bait. I don't think he's going to be very strong in the process, though, trying to steer anybody.
After we get past Malik McDowell and Caleb Brantley, and he touched on Chris Wormley, we start talking about going down into that second, third round area, at least where these guys are projected. Who sticks out for you after that?
Well, I think honestly, one of the most attractive and maybe the most attractive defensive tackle prospect in the draft is really Montravius Adams of Auburn. When I look at him and watch him play, it's just that he has that ability and that defensive end type speed and ability that makes your jaw drop at times with the way that he can really run and get after the ball, but also the way that he explodes off of the snap and can get his hips into the gap. And he combines all that with the brutal hand fighting ability that you want to see in a defensive tackle. And that's just the whole package. You're looking at the whole package with him. But you're kind of looking at, from an overall standpoint, the top group of defensive tackles are full of damaged goods. And in that way, it's not surprisingly, Montravius Adams, who might actually be the most attractive defensive tackle. A lot of people have thought that he's been sort of an underachiever in his time at Auburn since being an extremely high recruit. So I think that he stands out. If you're looking at him in the second round, you might be intrigued and you might think, well, maybe we should do this. But otherwise, I don't think that they're going to target this position very high in the first round or the second round unless somebody really falls that becomes very intriguing to them.
Speaking of intriguing, DeMarcus Walker from Florida State. I wish you were a little bit bigger. I wish you were a little bit bendier to move out maybe to the defensive end spot. Maybe he could be like that Jared Odrick role from 5 years ago where he starts out at D end on run plays and then moves into defensive tackle. He seems to be all over the board. I've seen as high as early second round, as late as fourth round. Where do you stand on DeMarcus Walker and his skill set?
Well, I do like DeMarcus Walker. He's always reminded me actually of like maybe perhaps a slightly less explosive version of Frank Clark over in Seattle. And Frank Clark's a defensive end. I think that's what DeMarcus is going to play at the next level. I think he's going to move inside to defensive tackle on pass downs because he has that size and that sort of ability. And he also has the experience and he's laid down some pretty good tape that way. But I think you're looking at him as more of a base defensive end, as you kind of alluded to. He's a guy that I do like, that I would be pretty high on. I wish he was, it's not that I wish he was bigger, it's more that I wish he was a little bit more explosive. It's sort of like with Chris Wormley. The pieces are there for Chris Wormley because he's 6'5" and 300 pounds and runs really fast for that size. But when you watch Chris Wormley a lot and you keep watching and you keep trying to see this explosiveness off of the snap and the ability to really get his hips in the gap and be powerful and brutal with people, you're not seeing as much of that as you want to. So with DeMarcus Walker, I think it's a little bit similar in that you want to see some true explosiveness in there, and you're not seeing it as often as you'd like. But he is agile. He can get off blocks. He works his hands very well. He's got athleticism and very technically sound player that can play inside or out and would be an asset to a team.
The value really doesn't seem to be in the first 2 rounds, especially for the Dolphins. I mean, probably for anybody. So when you get down into do you see the value being more in the 3rd round where the Dolphins have 1 pick, or in the 5th round where they have 3 picks?
If I were to consider a defensive tackle in this draft, and I were the Dolphins with their arsenal of picks, I would probably wait until those 5th round picks before I get serious about anybody. There is the possibility, as I said, if Jonathan Allen falls all the way to 22, you've really got to consider it. You've got to consider Montravius Adams as well, just because he's such a good football player. But ultimately, the team has other needs, and they do have Jordan Phillips, and he is coming along year by year. I see his track being very similar to Paul Soliai, in that he just keeps getting a little bit better every year. And so I think that they should probably hold off until the 5th round. Some guys that I see that could fall down that far that would be really interesting would be Jaron Jones of Notre Dame, or possibly Charles Walker of Oklahoma. I think that Charles Walker and Larry Ogunjobi of Charlotte, who will go much higher actually, will go probably in the 2nd, 3rd round area. They remind me of one another in that these are movement types with really long arms and good hand use that can keep blockers off them, but they move like linebackers, especially when they're moving down the line laterally and they're working through trash. You see them change directions. And it's almost linebacker-like, probably a slow linebacker like Brandon Spikes, but still. So the direction change ability is there. They have enough bulk and enough heft to really do some damage at defensive tackles, but they're very intriguing with their ability to work the line and move around laterally. I think Charles Walker fits in there. The problem with him is there are some issues with respect to concussions and maybe some character issues that really take investigation. And the other guy I mentioned for the 5th round, Jaron Jones of Notre Dame. This is a very tall, 6'6", 310 something odd pounds, 316 pounds, and he has a 7'1" wingspan, and he is brutal powerful. I mean, that's what he is when he goes in. He's a very linear player, so he gets kind of linear penetration, but he explodes and gets his hips into the gaps. He has very high brutality, and that length dominates the passing lanes, but also, dominates the quarterback's vision because he can really push a center into the backfield. I don't think he's going to go very high because he's got some serious question marks about his, again, off-field locker room work ethic type stuff, but also because he's got an injury history. But when I watch him on tape, it's just brutal and very attractive. Particularly, you watch him against the Miami Hurricanes. That game should have been declared a homicide. I mean, he was all over the place, and he was amazing in that game. Right. So those are the guys that I'd consider in the 5th round.
2 other players I know you like, CK, are Carlos Watkins from Clemson and Dalvin Tomlinson from Alabama. Tell us a little bit about them and what round you foresee them going in, roughly.
Well, again, if I were the Dolphins, I'm probably not considering anybody until we get to the value areas of the 5th round or so.
Right.
So, Carlos Watkins, it is possible he could get down there. I see him as a guy, when you watch him, he's not particularly fast or great feet, but he does have a very strong upper body and long limbs, and he is an initial contact guy that plays with leverage, and he really just does his job. And he gets enough push and enough action on passing downs that you think maybe he can play there in the NFL and stay on the field on some downs. I actually see he and Caleb Brantley, as well as Jaleel Johnson and Vincent Taylor and Nazaire Jones, I see them as all very similar players, almost to where you almost wouldn't care which one of those guys you're getting if this is the type of player that you're looking for. Dalvin Tomlinson, I think, is a little bit of a different creature. If you're looking at him, I don't think you're going to get him in the 5th round. He's going to go too high. But he is a guy with very, very strong upper body, and his hand use is among the best that I've seen in this entire class for any of the defensive tackles. I mean, he really has professional hands, and he shows the anchor ability. He kind of plays like a nose, but the thing is that he's a little bit smaller than the nose, at 6'3" and 310 pounds, but he's also got a lot more lateral ability than some of the nose. Like a true nose would be a guy like Colorado Josh Tupou, and that's a 6'3", 350+ pound player with a very big wingspan, who is just absolutely brutal when double teamed. I mean, these guys try and move him and they just can't. I watched him live in the Shrine practices and in the Shrine game, and it's just like double teams matter not to him. I mean, it's kind of amazing. He plays more like a true nose. I think Dalvin Tomlinson kind of plays like a nose, except he's also got that lateral ability that makes him really attractive. That's why he's going to go in the 2nd, 3rd round area, where I don't think Miami is necessarily going to want to get involved. But that's how I see him.
CK, for a lot of the Dolphins fans out there that may want to take a look at some of these late-round tackles, might want to take a look at some of these unknown defensive tackles, what would you recommend that they look for in a defensive tackle that fits Miami's scheme?
Well, it's interesting because Miami has definitely looked at some of the fat guys, if you will. So guys like Steve Tuikolevatu of USC. I think they have looked at Josh Tupou. They've looked at some of the bigger players that you think of as run stoppers. If I were looking for somebody for them, though, I'm looking for more of a gap penetration guy, like Jaron Jones that I mentioned, very linear and brutal, powerful player. But another guy that they'll be looking at, actually 2 guys that they'll be looking at, would be UCLA's Eddie Vanderdoes and Indiana's Ralph Green. And Eddie Vanderdoes, unfortunately, he's another instance of kind of wasted potential, but he has first step and initial push explosive ability that makes you really think of Montravius Adams. In the first couple of steps, the first couple of blows, he looks like Montravius Adams. But then it really breaks down from there because he's a little bit sloppy, too fat, and he doesn't have a lot of lateral ability to run around. He spins a lot to try and get off the blocks, and some coaches are going to have some feelings about that, about turning your back to the ball. But everything with him is all about that explosive initial step and that initial burst and getting into the gap. And that's what Ralph Green is about too. It's all about the explosive first move. And that's what I would look at in Miami's scheme, is these guys that can get off of the ball, get their hips into the gap, especially if they're long-limbed and have good height, because then they can dominate the passing lanes, and that's really valuable in Miami's scheme with the way that they play, what they installed under Jim Washburn.
We have covered 20 to 25 defensive tackles, and I'd say right around the 20-minute mark. Where else can you get that prior to the draft other than from CK Parrott? Follow him on Twitter for year-round NFL Draft, Miami Dolphins News. And with that, we are going to sign off. Follow us on YouTube, on iTunes, Spreaker, Twitter, Facebook. You know where to find us. And if it's not on the right side and it's not on the left side, it is on the fin side. Solo D, take us home.
It ain't the left side or the right side, and it must be the fin side. It ain't the left side or the right side, and it must be the fin side. Listen, Dolphins fans across the land all tuning in to see what Brian, Cat, and Paul about to do again. We rep our team, you can't change, stop, or ruin it. All we need